Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Weaver from the Owens Library. We want to welcome you to the first event of the Owens Talks Library Chapter Series. We are very pleased that Jen Hazel, Professor of English, and the Humanities Department has agreed to present today. Jen holds degrees in literature and will be entering her 20th year of teaching, with 14 of those at Owens. Jen is an avid reader and considers herself to be a lifelong learner. There will be a time for questions at the end of the presentation, although I think Jen has some activities during the presentation. You can also put your questions into the chat, and we'll be watching for those as well. And if you can remember to mute your audio, unless you're interacting with the session, that would be very helpful. And so today, Jen will be presenting on the topic equity and inclusivity in the classroom, one instructor's quest to figure out what these terms mean in asynchronous, synchronous, and face-to-face classes. So welcome, Jen.
All right. Hello, everyone. Am I loud enough? Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Perfect. All right. Thank you for all the replies. So we are going to get started today, and I have something that I want to preface this by saying that I, and by no means am an expert on this topic. I have really just heard it's so hot right now and we're talking about it. And I'm like, I really want to share my experience. So that's what I'm doing. I'm sharing my experience and trying to sift out what this means in a classroom. And right now, we're faced with many different types of classrooms. What does that look like in those several different classrooms? So, so here's where we're going to go today. We have a lot of different individuals here with us, which is super awesome. We have a collection of students, we have faculty, we have staff. So to begin, and this is kind of where my journey began, was kind of defining some key concepts. And then I want to look at visiting these concepts in a classroom. And then we're going to look at what an inclusive classroom might look like. And then I'm going to share with you what my next stops are on my journey. And then we can talk about questions and other things that pertain to the topic. So to begin, we're going to talk about defining topics. Now, if you have been at our equity sessions this year, you have probably seen this graphic that was used. And it's super important, and we're going to get to it in just a minute, but one of the things that I want to think about when we look at this is we can't talk about equity without talking about equality. So I'm going to work on defining that one first, okay? So when I think of equality, here's what I think of. I think of two things with the same value. So two stacks of books, the exact same books. And I'm not talking about a first edition and third edition. They would all be the exact same editions. Stack of coins, all the exact stack of coins, okay? If I think of this in an example with people, I might use my two kids. Sour Patch Kids are a fave in this house. It would be giving both of them the exact number of Sour Patch Kids, okay? It's kind of the way I look like at equality. So then if I look at equity, okay, I would be looking at it from this perspective, okay? Equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful, not necessarily exactly the same thing, okay? Because what Joey may need to be successful isn't what Maria may need to be successful, okay? Because, well, everyone's different, right? So if we give everyone exactly the same thing to make them equal, what it means or what it's looking at is saying that we all, that everyone started out in exactly the same place. But we know that can't be the case, right? Give me a thumbs up if you're with me in the chat button. Oh, and or like that, yes. Or a hand, thank you. Yeah, right? So we wouldn't, awesome. So we wouldn't all start out in the same place because we're all different, right? Okay, so
Thumbs
now
up.
back to...
Why is everyone doing a thumbs up?
Oh, because I asked everyone to give me a thumbs up if they were with me so far. So let's go back
I'm
to
going to
the
do a thumbs
graphic.
up. I don't know why we're doing it, but we're doing it.
Okay, so let's go back to the graphic, okay? So while this is used a lot, I think it really illustrates this point. So if we look at equality, which would be the example on the left, so we have a group of people that are trying to watch a baseball game over the fence, okay? So equality would say we're going to give everyone the exact same, so everyone gets a box, all right? But what's the problem with everyone getting a box? You can write it in the chat, or you can use your microphone.
They're not the same height.
Yeah, they're not the same height. So what happens? Okay, not everyone needs one, and it doesn't help. Just one isn't going to help everyone. Good. Candace? Yeah, the little guy can't see, right? He's like, unless he's squeezing through a crack, right? Okay, so if we look at the example of equity, what do we see? Shannon? Everyone's equal. Everyone ends up being the same height. Yes, absolutely. So the little guy was given 2 boxes, and the person that needed to be able to see, they're all able to see then. Yes, good. Thank you, guys. All right. Okay, so now that we kind of have that term, and really when we look at it, for me, when I started this kind of quest to unravel this and think about it, one of the things that I had to keep saying to myself is, do I know what these terms mean? Or do I really know what these terms mean? And I had to sit down and really, really think about it and say, what exactly does that mean? Okay? So then if we take this a little bit further and we start to look at inclusivity, okay? And as an English teacher, I have to tell you this bothers me just slightly. If you look up a definition, I love when I mean this sarcastically, and my students will laugh about this, when you give a definition using the same word to define it. Because already, if you're trying to look at it, right, you wouldn't know what the word meant. So inclusivity says being inclusive. But what does inclusive mean? So including all, which including is still the form of that word, or not excluding. Okay? So we all kind of have those terms, right? English teacher taught you the same thing. Yes. Absolutely. Okay. So what would this look like in a classroom though? What could it be in a classroom? How might that look? Okay. And so the terms, if we think about applying them to a classroom, may look different, right? Okay. Because really, that's the one area that I feel like I struggled the most with. Okay, I've got these terms, but what does that mean when I'm in class? How do I use that in a classroom? I don't know. And I remember pausing and really thinking about that. For all of the instructors I have out there, raise your hand if you've felt the same way. Awesome. Okay, so in a search for thinking about this in a classroom, I was like, all right, so let me search on Google and see what comes up. So for my students out there, I gave it a Goog, okay? So and here's what one of the top items, all right, that it says about, and I searched, yes, keywords are important. For my students. So I searched equity and inclusiveness in a classroom. And one of the first things that comes up is from the government website in Ontario, Canada, is the first thing that comes up. And it says that equity is a condition or state of fair, inclusive, and respectful treatment of all people. Okay, so think about that again. It's a condition or state of fair, inclusive, and respectful treatment of all people. So for me, there's something here that I struggle a little bit with. Anyone have any thoughts about what might be a struggle within that definition? Fair. Okay, good. Candace, why? Anyone know why fair might be an issue? Because fair isn't always equal. Okay. Don't like the word condition because it sounds like an alignment. Kathleen.
Fair is subjective.
Good. And people have different people have different definitions of fair. Absolutely.
Including
Absolutely.
the person involved.
Absolutely. So there's many different ways of that. So here's my example of that with fair. So this would be thinking about this. Your kid's watching you go to work as you enjoy another snow day. So for me, this can be, well, now with COVID it might not be, but it can be a real example, and it's happened in the past where we're open and my husband is a high school teacher and the district is closed. So I see these faces as I leave, just smiling at me as I'm walking out the door. Fair, but, right? Okay, so absolutely. Here's where I struggle with the word fair within that, okay? Fair, to me, means everyone is getting the same thing, okay? And if everyone gets the same thing, then the problem is it only works, again, like we talked about with equity, if everyone's the same to begin with. And we know everyone's not the same, right? Right. Okay. Yeah. So that doesn't really work. So let's think about it from a different perspective and try to say maybe more of what we might be looking for. Okay? So upon thinking about this even deeper, one of the things that I thought about was really what we're looking for is we're talking about an inclusive classroom. And to me, thinking about being inclusive means that everyone is included, right? And more of an English teacher way to look at no one is excluded. But what does that mean, right? So if I break it down and I think about it in a classroom more, I kind of look at it from the standpoint of saying that it's a place where students feel they belong, okay? And thus they can thrive learning in that environment of belonging, okay? Give me some thoughts on what you think they might be. You can raise your hand if you want to talk, put it in the chat. What is it that you kind of look for thinking about an inclusive classroom? If you were going to give it maybe a definition. Everyone is included, where everyone feels safe speaking up, everyone has access, the teacher talking to each student the same way, everyone feels like they're being heard, no one feels intimidated or threatened, everyone feels welcome. Everyone has an equal chance to succeed. The difficulty is when something one student needs, they feel to belong, intrudes on another student feeling they belong. Everyone knows and feels no matter what they say it will be respected. Okay. Awesome. These are all great thoughts. Okay. So now, what would that actually look like in a classroom? Like, what types of things would happen? How can you foster belonging within a classroom? So thinking about that a little bit deeper, to me, I often thought about what is it that I want, or what is it that helps me feel like belonging to something. When I am in a meeting, in a group, in a session, in a classroom, what are those types of things? So bottom line for me, thinking about this, is at the core, I often think about, I often try to think about things like, how would I want people to respond to me? How would I want people to be within the classroom? And so some things that I think about that often comes up for me is normalizing academic struggles. So my students on here are totally going to laugh, because when I explain this, you totally know what I'm going to say. So when I say normalizing academic struggles, I think of this as like putting it out there that we all do struggle, and things all can be difficult for all of us. So one of the things that I very upfront tell my students is what a terrible speller I am. I'm waiting for the laughy cry faces to happen. I am an awful speller, very awful speller. I write on the board, and I do this very funny thing where I start writing a word, and if I don't know it, I just scribble off. And it's true, it is true. And I kind of just scribble off, and I'll be like, well, you know what I mean. Or I will spell it wrong. And for me, I used to think when I first started teaching that I used to be really embarrassed by the fact that I couldn't spell. And then the more I started teaching, the more I started thinking about the fact that we all struggle, and we all have things that we're really great at, and we all have things that we really just are not. And no matter how hard I try to spell, it just does not come out well. And so I just work with it, and I go with it, because I think it's important for students, to understand that school is hard, and it's really difficult to, we're not going to be great at everything. We're always going to struggle at certain things. Yes, and it shows you're not perfect, that I'm human. Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Candace. Candace added that she likes that I was so upfront about it. And it's a great laughing joke in the classroom. We have good laughs when I really just cannot spell something, and it helps break the ice with stuff too. Other things that I think about are using validating language with students. And here's what I mean by that. Okay. I try very hard to learn my students' names, and not just learn their names, but to learn their preferred name, what they like to be referred to as. So, and I try to model this behavior to begin with when I write a welcome letter or do a welcome video. So for example, I really do not like being called Jennifer. I also really don't like being called Mrs. Hazel, although I know I'm Mrs. Hazel. To me, my mother-in-law is Mrs. Hazel. So in my welcome letter, I tell students that what I prefer you to call me is Jen. And here's why. I just don't think of myself as Mrs. Hazel. Mrs. Hazel is my mother-in-law who I love dearly, but that's not me. And I want you to know me as the way I prefer to be called, which is Jen. And I really try to learn students' names and use their nicknames as well. I will say that it becomes a challenge sometimes when you are teaching synchronously, because you will see the students, if they sign in under their gosh, what's the word I want? Your legal name, that's the name that comes up. So, or given name, thank you. So that that can be a struggle sometimes, but it's really working through that and knowing that student and really working to use that. Also with that would be watching the language that you use, like using gender neutral language. And this is one I really struggle with. And Erica, I see you're on here because you always remind me of this. Trying to say things, instead of saying, I have a bad habit of saying like, hey guys, what's wrong when I say, hey guys? What's missing? Well, it's slang is one, yes.
Girls are missing.
Girls are missing, right? And I'm excluding others. Absolutely. I'm being very gender specific with that. So I struggle with that, and I work hard at trying to be more inclusive and saying things like, Erica always likes to say you all instead. I prefer like everyone. Hi, everyone. But there's lots of different things that can be used instead of that. Other things that I think about is demystifying difficult courses and skills. So for me, I teach English, but specifically I mostly teach composition, and I have many compositions students who are here with us today. And one of the things that I think about is often students will tell me, and I know there's a few of you on here who have told me this, I'm not a good writer. Okay? And often I think, why do you feel you're not a good writer? Well, and sometimes I ask, and sometimes I don't have to ask because you tell me that you've had an instructor before who told you that you didn't write well. And so then what happens is you get this block about trying to do it. And the thing is, and I tell students this all on the first day, and I remind students of this often. Yep, that was you, Angie. And I remind students of this often. There's nothing that should be like elusive or that should be mystifying about academic writing. So it really is, it can be formulaic, it can be specific, and once you know what it is, you can then follow that. But it's not something you can't be great at. Everyone can be great at academic writing. We're not talking about writing poetry, we're not talking about writing short stories, but academic writing, we all can do that. And trying to pull on other skills that students have that they do well. I try to use in the classroom something that is like, kind of like a formula. You have this plus this equals this, right? If I asked one of you, you could probably write it in the chat, right? Do this, 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 and this, right? Okay. So there's a little bit of a side conversation about, hey guys, being geographically specific, not gender specific, very eastern U.S. And Scott, who teaches geography, says, I like where you're going with that, Anne. And that may be. I just want to make sure that I'm being more inclusive, so I'm really working on that. And I love that Erica reminds me of that all the time. And right, Lisa, know your audience. Good. So some of the other things that I think about in class and that I try to use is promoting a growth mindset. So promoting that just because today we don't understand something doesn't mean later we're not going to understand it. We have to keep working and growing, and if we believe we can, then we can. Along with that is providing growth-centered feedback. So teaching English, I think often about saying this. So for example, on the first essay, like these things were really good and we want to work on this next time. And here's how you can work on it. And then once you've done that and you've conquered that, let's try to work more on this. So keep talking about that growth. You did really well on this, now let's push it to this and move to this. Providing opportunities for students to explore interest when it's applicable. So in my field, with writing, I used to when I first started teaching a very long time ago, I would use, yes, positive reinforcement, Tina. So I would start always with like a do not write list. And I thought a lot about that. And because it was, don't write about this, don't write about that, don't cover this, don't write about that. And really, in thinking about that, what's the problem? What's the problem with limiting those choices for students? What's the message send? Okay, Candy, you're constantly telling them no. It's negative feedback. You should be saying what they can do and not what they can't. Too many don'ts. It feels restrictive. Right, who are you to say what they know about? And it's limiting, right? It is. It's really limiting. So, and it's not encouraging. Good. So here's what I started thinking about with this is just because it's something that I may not like hearing or that I've heard tons of times doesn't mean that's something that isn't your interest and what you might want to explore. So instead of saying no, thinking about my job is more to say, how can I help this be better? How can I help you get to where you want? So, so what I've done is I've made like kind of a shift the more that I thought about it and was like, here's a list of topics you can choose from so you know what I'm looking at. But essentially, you could do anything you wanted to. Just make sure you talk to me so we can make sure we get it in a way that it's a good topic and that it's a smooth topic and that you're able to find research and things to support and that it is clear and that it makes sense for what we're trying to do. Other things that I think about is making sure that I know my students as individuals and help them feel comfortable. So what I mean by that, before I move on with that, I want to say this. Candy wrote, it felt more like you trusted us to choose a topic we were interested in. Absolutely, because you're going to enjoy it more. Students are going to enjoy it more if they get to choose what that is because you have vast number of interests on things. And we're lucky in composition that you're able to explore those areas. So knowing your students as individuals. So one thing that I think often about, and this semester really a lot, and trying to help meet students where they are and feel comfortable, is a couple of different things. For example, thought a lot about, so with COVID, how, and I taught this semester, I should say, I taught this semester synchronously and face-to-face. And one of the things that I did all semester, and it was by like chance that not chance, but it was kind of, I thought about it and was like, oh, I'm going to try this out and see how this works. And from this, I think I'm never going to do anything different, is I, even when I was in a face-to-face class, I turned on Collaborate and I recorded every session. And one thing that I found is occasionally I had students in and out for COVID, but I also had students that were in and out because they had childcare failed that night. They were getting home late from work, and what was going to be easier was to pop on to Collaborate, to participate. So using that enabled students to join in even when they weren't able to make it to the classroom. So there was a lot less in attendance where maybe other things would have been going on that would have had students not be able to attend that then were able to attend. And I think that that really is something like, yes, absolutely, Anne, I agree that it may be the way we teach from now on. Absolutely. And thinking about it in retrospect, I was like, you know, I never want to not do that, because also if a student wasn't able to attend, either on the, either it face-to-face or like if it was in a synchronous class within, they weren't able to attend and I had it recorded, they were able to go back and watch that recording. Candy typed in, it seems like that way worked better for the majority of our class. yeah, life happens. You're right, Candy. It did happen that way with our class, and it was a great option to be able to do that. So in that, being flexible and meeting students where they were, I had some students that weren't able to. They thought that it was going to be okay face to face, and it wasn't. So trying to work with them so that they could still attend class and still meet those goals. And they participated. We joined in as a group. They were up on the big screen within class in face-to-face. And it worked really well. And it was awesome to be able to do that. Jane wrote, for those who have focus issues, especially having the recording to go back to, yes, absolutely. Jane, that's a really good point. I did have some students tell me that as well, that it was easy to go back to see what it was we talked about. Or even what's nice too is in synchronous classes, there's a lot of disruption sometimes. You're at home, you have kids running around, and Beth just added, you provided access, making the playing field equal. Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of kids running around. Sometimes if you have children or somebody's knocking at the door, we've had that happen in class. Lots of different things. And students were able to go back and catch up on what they missed. And that was awesome. Yes, and Diane, yes, video and sound issues. And it makes it easier to go back and look. Yes, Vanessa, absolutely. So that's something that I actually can't imagine not doing that in the future, because it really just made it easy for students to participate when they were able, because sometimes life happens. And trying to look at that and do that and say, hey, let me help. So other things, and this is an area that I'm working on currently, and it's on my working on list too, is making the course reflect a diverse society and use examples from that. So when I teach literature, we always have a joke for anyone on here who, I was able to see most of the people who are coming in, but for anyone on here who also is in the English department and teaches literature or in humanities, we always have this saying that it's like the canon of what people read is always dead white guys. What's the problem with only presenting dead white guys? Literature from dead white guys. Kathleen.
Leaves out women, it leaves out minorities,
Right.
and so on.
Right, absolutely. And Jane says, what about the other guys? Exactly. There is a whole vast amount of people. Yes, Terry, post-colonial literature, it's all of what that's about. You're missing out on so many other things. So in literature, it's trying I try to take that and give a large and vast amount of different things to examine. And Kathleen, I'm going to pick on you for a minute because you're in here. And I know you did that this summer when you taught when you taught with the American Lit class this summer, trying to pick things that were very different and things that maybe students hadn't read before and hadn't looked. Yeah, absolutely. So trying to make
266 as well this summer. I'm sorry, this semester.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of Native American, African American, women, stuff that students probably didn't read in high school.
Absolutely. That's awesome and exciting. I can't wait to see what you end up with, Kathleen. Kurt added leaving other people out. And Monica said it can be hard to relate to them. Right. Because in your experience, you know what you know. And you might not feel connection with that, right? Hi, JJ. JJ says, you rob or disadvantage students by not presenting them a broad spectrum of contributors from non-colonial male contributors. Absolutely. And then Jane says, you don't know what you'll enjoy if you haven't been exposed to it. Absolutely. So that would be an area of working on that and trying to do that. And other things that go along with that would be things like being relevant to students, like examples that are relevant to students and relevant to things that they experience, and trying to pull that information. I would also, depending on the class, think about if I was using videos trying to pick things that was representative of the students that were within my class. And in doing that, though, we want to make sure we're not making judgments about what students might look like, who students might be in our class. We have a broad spectrum because everyone is different, and then you're trying to grab different things for different students to feel they can relate to. Another thing that I do, and then one thing that I want to, you'll see this on my list later, is establishing model and clear expectations for language and actions. The part that I want to work on is creating community norms. So before I start classes, one thing I always do is I talk about here's what's expected in the classroom, here's how we want to treat people, here's the language that we want to use. And some of my research, and I'm taking also a class right now on teaching effectively in an online environment. And it's super helpful and super interesting. And one thing they talk about, and I've heard, it's nothing that I haven't heard before, but I never thought about how helpful it could be in, for example, like an asynchronous class, which is creating community norms. What is the expectation that everyone brings to the table? By bringing it and putting it out there for everyone to join in, what would you do? How would that be better than just me giving it? Anyone? Everyone knows what's expected and the comfort in knowing. Absolutely. Good. And everyone then has a voice too, right? And everyone can contribute to that because everyone should have a voice in the classroom. So some other things would be inviting diverse perspectives and different viewpoints, and really fostering that by talking with students and asking them, well, how did you look at this? How do you look at this? And having them share that. There's some students in my honors 101 class on here, and that's a lot of what we did this semester. Was looking at things from different viewpoints because we all bring something different to the table because we all have different experiences. Kurt just added, I found when I let my students set norms and expectations, they lay out high expectations. Yes, higher rules than what you did. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that, right? And you've given them a voice to be able to do that. So any of you who are on there that I'm going to be having next semester, you can hold me to the fact that we're going to do that, okay? Set community norms as a group. And then one of the other things on here that thinking about is trying to offer things in multiple learning styles, which is really specific and really helps within asynchronous courses as well as synchronous and face-to-face courses, but offering things in different perspectives. So am I going to help meet a learning style of someone who is a read writer, of someone who's very visual like I am, of someone who has to do to be able to learn, those type of things. And then am I accommodating like individuals with disabilities? And the one thing I think of a lot with that is like, have I made sure, so several years ago I had my very first experience with a student who was red-green colorblind. I guess it was probably about 4 years ago. And we were in the class and I was walking through Blackboard, and the way I set it up, I also use Blackboard in my land classes. So me for when the pandemic hit, everything was already there. So it was easier to kind of like just keep going. I put all the assignments up there weekly and stuff. So students had all that information there. But so I'm going through it, and in a face-to-face class, I talk them through it. Here's where it is, here's such and such. And I had a student say to me, Jen, I can't see that. And I was like, oh. And then I was like, can everyone else see it? What am I missing? Because I could see it. And he said, I am red-green colorblind. And I had all over it red and green and all kinds of other colors. And it was such an eye-opening experience to learn and to think about that. And so now I'm very cautious of trying to watch those type of colors because not everyone can see them. So things along those lines, as well as like the way you post documents, and Blackboard has this great thing that if you are posting it where it does the little, like it tells you if it's readable or not readable, like the green little, trying to think of what it looks like. I guess it's kind of like a gas gauge, actually, and it's green if it means like, yay, and I get really upset when it's like in the red because I'm like, oh, no one can read this. I got to go back to the document. I got to go back to look at this. Trying to be mindful of that and being mindful of how much you, in a lot of ways, use technology or how you use it. If you're using it, wanting to make sure that you're using it in a way that helps push the class forward and not just to use it, and making sure that you're clear and provide clear instructions for students on how to do that. Diane added, and many times someone won't tell you they have a problem such as color blindness. Absolutely. We can't rely on students always to tell us these things. So we want to make sure that we think about these things and try to do as many of them. A couple other things that I like to think about with belonging. I want to read this one. Jane said, one of the upsides of this pandemic is that perhaps it has brought a broader awareness to these types of disabilities that have gone unnoticed for so long. Absolutely, Jane. Absolutely. A couple of other things that I think about keeping a sense of belonging, fostering belonging in a classroom are thinking about like the comfortability factor with students and within asking students and their accessibility with it is when you're in a synchronous class, thinking about, are we not requiring students to use a camera? And I have to tell you, I thought really, really long and hard about this. And anyone who's on here who's in my department, we've talked about this as a group. And I think while it seems as if we should ask students to do that, and there's a lot of reasons why it would be, what would be difficult or what would be uninclusive about doing that. Does anyone have any ideas that they might add to that? Why it wouldn't be a good idea? Environment or home life. When we're using the cameras in the synchronous class. Yep, when it's not a good idea to require students to turn on cameras, or why we might not want to. Background rooms, right. Not everyone has a webcam with their computer, absolutely. Yeah, so some people might not want to share their background because they might not want everyone to see, or they might feel that their background isn't something that they want others to know. Sometimes they may have little kids running around. Sometimes they may be in the military and they're in an undisclosed location. Well, we are not allowed to require it, but I find it difficult to create relationships with a lack of screen boxes. That can be hard. You can ask your students to put on an emoticon so they can see a face, or use a picture as well, Denise. And Patsawats, not confident when talking, showing your face. Bad internet, yes, that's something too. Right now in Lucas County, most students are home, and quite honestly, if you have more than one kid and they're online and they're trying to take a class, the internet can be very shoddy. Like right now, I did share that my husband is a high school teacher, and right now, even though they don't have to be, when I have to be doing things that are online meetings or like today's presentation, he will go to work so that we don't cross on the internet, and I'm still able to use like my camera. It can be distracting for other students, absolutely. Lots of different things. And being inclusive would be letting that person have their own comfortability with that. Jane says, come to the library. We have great Wi-Fi. Thanks, Jane. The next time I have that problem, I will. And a couple other things that I think often about too is assignments. Am I varying the type of assignments that I'm giving students? If it's all just one thing, and even in a writing class, thinking about this, giving other low stakes assignments so that their grades aren't completely just based on one thing, like one essay or just 3 large essays, because what might happen if we do that? Kathleen added, I don't think we're required to, allowed to require cameras to be on. I have not heard officially one way or the other. It is suggested that we do not on that, but thank you. I think Anne might have mentioned that too earlier. That certain levels of the playing field, again, so learning styles are different. Absolutely. And small stakes assignments, right, lead up to larger assignments. So if we blow one thing, we haven't blown the entire thing. Yep, backgrounds work, Kathleen, gives them a comfort level and provides their confidence when they work on smaller assignments. Absolutely. And varying the types of assignments gives students a shot to shine. Okay. And one last thing is thinking about, if a student doesn't perform well on one type of assignment or proficient in a type of assignment learning, then their grade disequally represents their ability. Absolutely. Good point, JJ. Course descriptions say a camera is required. Yes, remind me about that later, Kathleen. Please. Okay, so thinking about the time of when assignments are due and when you put them out there. How many of you say an assignment is due at 5 p.m.? Anyone? Do you guys do end of the day, 11:55? 11:59. End of the day, end of the day. Yeah. Why do you do, sometimes class time, yes. Why do you do 11:59 p.m. besides the fact that midnight is confusing on what day it is? You can't post midnight, true. But what else? To accommodate schedules, yeah. Yeah, Kathleen, why? Because somebody might what?
Turn my camera on, or I'm sorry, my mic on, because they have different work schedules, they have kids to pick up at school, all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. James, JJ just typed that too. Meeting at 4 or 5, work schedules, family. Yeah, yeah. So thinking about that. So I have talked for enough to give you what I have thought about. What do you do that's inclusive? How do you have an inclusive environment? What are some things you do? Kathy.
I actually make all of my assignments due at 4 p.m. on Monday, and I tell them why. Because a lot of the work during the week, they have the weekend to catch up. Some of them work on weekends. They can do it during the week. But most importantly, the help desk closes around 4 o'clock. They start to wrap up, and especially in the first few assignments, I want them to be able to talk to someone who can help them if they have any tech problems. And that's not me. It's somebody who knows. So I leave it that way and just let them know if you have a problem, I don't close it. I'll know when you turned it in. But I do that because I want them to know there is a place they can go to ask questions. So that was it.
Thanks, Kathy. To maximize the time. JJ says, plus giving 11:59 p.m. gives students the benefit and ability to turn in an assignment on the day it's due, but maximize the time available on that day. By the end of business, may be best to accommodate the old-fashioned notion that the workday ends at 5 p.m. Use preferred names. This is Kathleen. tell my students about your struggles in school, my journey with writing, my strategies to compensate for my shortcomings as the writer. Awesome. Anyone else? Kathy.
I just wanted to add something. I didn't want to add it at the beginning because you were on a roll and it was so interesting with everything we put together. But I think we gave the word fair an unfair evaluation. There's a very famous book called Justice by John Rawls. I used it when I started. And Rawls argument is equality is a great term, but you can't get equality, and it doesn't always do you any good. So his argument is that you need to be fair, but he says you are not fair if you have bias or any injustice or any self-interest. And his word for good fairness is you get it by having empathy with the people you are trying to divide up, the resources among. And so I like that because students sometimes will use the word fair and we'll talk about it. And yes, sometimes you can be fair without really having the empathy, but I just wanted to give fair its due because it's a really great word. That's all.
Thanks, Kathy. Anyone else have anything else they do? Jane B, make an interesting topic to the student researchable. Let's look at an angle that can answer a research question on how we find research question and what your interest is. JJ, I was told the pre-teen, the fair is where pigs and horses get judged. LOL. I like that. I like that one, JJ, a lot. Anyone else? Okay, my students that I talked to about this. So students, what makes you feel like you belong in a classroom? Tell us. Kimberly.
I think I belong in the classroom because you already know, like, sometimes I struggle to stay focused because I'm running around, like, chasing my kid. I have, like, my dog distracting me. It's kind of hard to focus and be, like, an individual when I'm not in, like, a school setting. It's so hard for me to concentrate. Little things can get in the way, like, oh, my kid's sick. I need to take him somewhere. I need to get groceries. Something like that just... It's not structured for me, so it's hard for me to be, like, in my zone for school purpose. Like, I can't, like, function at home sometimes.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Candy, being in a classroom helps you stay focused, and I feel like I learn better out of your house. Good. Anyone else? What makes you feel like you belong? Angie agrees. Kaylee, I think the group project was really good because I don't think I would have chose to be involved otherwise. It kind of forces you to get involved and participate with others. So that helps you feel included. Right, Kaylee? Yes. Tyler, being in school helps me most of the time, but having teachers show that they understand helps. Tina, when I was a student, I felt like I belonged in a class when the instructor took time to connect with you. When teachers are willing to work with me when things come up that are out of my control, they are understanding, and it makes me feel like, is that supposed to be, happy. Makes you feel happy and feel like you belong. I gotcha. I gotcha, Vanessa. Anything else? Thank you guys for sharing. Sonson, understanding the student situation. Yes. Okay. Here's a couple other ideas. And this is stuff I've seen. Thank you, Kathy. This is some other stuff that I've seen as I've researched or as I was talking about the class that I'm taking right now. Some other things is thinking about how instructors can reflect on their own beliefs. So mitigating or counteracting implicit or unconscious bias. Teaching students about microaggressions. Microaggressions are the everyday verbal or nonverbal, like slights or snubs that are used. So if I give an example, it may be someone who's from someone who doesn't look like they were born in this country, and someone says, "Where were you born? Where are you from?" Or says, "You speak English very well." But quite honestly, they're here. This is their native land. So talking about, and as instructors, we all work with students on that, but actually teaching students how to respond to that. And that's an area I would love to like spend more time and think more about. Touching JJ's hair, dreadlocks without permission, just because you're curious. Absolutely, JJ, that's a great example. That's a great example, JJ. Thank you. Okay, reducing race and gender barriers to learning. So avoiding asking students to speak for a student of a certain nationality or race to speak for the entire race. So you're talking about something and then saying, "Oh, hey, so-and-so, what can you contribute on this?" Paying attention to pronouns. Some students may be like to use different pronouns than we think they should be using, or that their gender may say they should be using, or like gender, and I say that loosely. So paying attention to that, and paying attention to not saying, "Hey guys." Okay. Kathleen, this is a problem when you're an English teacher. It's tricky. It is tricky because you're taught it's this, right. But the world is different now, so it's trying to make that adjustment. Absolutely. Using visuals to broaden ideas about people. So, for example, I always think about this. Often see that, so my kids once got presents for their birthdays and from someone else, and it was, my son got the doctor outfit, it was dress up, and my daughter got the nurse. So it's challenging those ideas. Why couldn't my daughter be the doctor and my son be the nurse? Jane says, "I once commented that we should all be like young children because they don't see skin color. The person I was talking with said it's important for children and all to see skin color." Where the gallery thoughts are on this.
Yeah, just wondering what other people might think about this. To me, I think that it's important that we all look this, color shouldn't matter. But is that true? Ah, okay.
JJ, robbing skin denies someone the ethnicity or race, which may be a vulnerable part of their identity. The issue is not to see skin color, but to use, is to see skin color, but not to use skin color to discriminate. Thanks, JJ. It's a tough question. It shouldn't matter, but it most definitely does matter. Okay. Thanks, Kathleen. Very well said, JJ. Got it. It's a great comment, JJ. Thank you. Okay. Use blind assessments in grading to mitigate bias. So here's one that I do, and here's one I have never done. One is grading the same sections or questions for all students at the same time. So grading one stack of papers together. And I agree, like that Yes. I've never done anonymous grading. I don't know if anyone has. Please shout out if you've done it. And then asking for feedback on inclusive practices. I've asked students in class, but I've never actually done it with anonymous survey. And then the last thing on here that I think is super interesting that I've learned about recently is providing an inclusive syllabus. So one of the things that one of the things that is great, well, there's lots of things that's great about Owens, but one thing that's super great is we have the syllabus shells, and a lot of that stuff is contained within there, like items for students with disabilities who may have mental health issues, but some of the things are not. So for example, like an inclusive syllabus might include like a diversity statement, respectful dialogue, and I think I think not a diversity statement, but we're working towards an equity statement in there. But also things like this, including statements about students working with students who have religious holidays, transgendered students saying, tell me what your preferred pronouns may be. We do have stuff that has, Krista I know is on here, and we have, Krista, the stuff about the career closet and the food pantry. And then other things that might not be is things with working parents. So we are at 3, so I'm going to try to finish up quickly. You guys had a lot of stuff to say, and it was awesome. And I know I want to wrap up and be conscious of people's time. So for me, the next stops on my journey is, and again, those of you who are on here, you're welcome, Krista, and thank you for the link, the next stops on my journey. Because again, this is a journey for me, and this is the first time I've ever presented on this, but I felt like I wanted to say, here's some things I've learned, what else have you learned, and keep that dialogue going, is for me is setting community norms with students. And so any of you who are on here, and I'll have next semester, please hold me to that. Paying attention to language, like I said, making materials even more accessible. I still continue to do that. And then adding to my syllabus to make it even more inclusive. I want to add one last thing that Brandon said. He said, I agree, JJ, for many minority groups, skin color is closely tied to how much their feelings of self-worth or vice versa are. Sasan, thumbs up to you as well. And Jane, this has been awesome, making me be more mindful. It has. It's really awesome. So on the last part here, what questions do you have? Thanks, James. JJ.